Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Ask Professor Paranormal. I am your host and guide, Professor Paranormal, aka Lloyd Auerbach, and it looks like we have a small group to start with. Hopefully we'll get a few more people coming in, but I want to say hello to everybody. You can go ahead and put yourselves in the chat there if you want to say hi. Good to have some folks coming in. And of course, as always, for anybody who might be new or just watching this new, hi, Tina. I will be answering your questions that pop in. Hi, Paul. And we can talk about different topics. I can talk about different topics you want me to throw in there. That'd be fine. But, as always, I thought I'd start out with a couple of announcements. And I'll kind of finish up with those too. Just a reminder that the new classes for the Rhine Education Center start the week of October 7th. And I am teaching, starting that week, I'll be co-teaching a course on Tuesday nights with John Kruth, who is the Executive Director and Research Director of the Rhine Research Center, called Ethics in Field Investigations, kind of covering that whole thing. And I will be teaching a class on Monday nights called, basically it's Sci and Movies, Television, and Literature. It's basically pop culture. That's a 4-week class. So it's a 6-week class for the ethics. And then in November, I'll be teaching a class on people in parapsychology. And Tina, how was your weekend with Joe Scheel? He's an incredible guy. Hopefully you had a good time and learned a lot from him. I think that he's one of my favorites for the Forever Family Foundation. And I'll be doing something for his church foundation at some point next year. I just have to schedule things as well for that. All right. There is Jimmy Aiken, who is one of my former students, is teaching again the Intro to Parapsychology for the Rhine Education Center. And of course, the link for those of you who are watching this for the first time is in the description for the channel. You can find that there as well. Also should mention that this coming weekend, and I'm glad to hear that, Tina, this coming weekend, the Society for Scientific Exploration, which is this scientificexploration.org, is doing a virtual conference. They're having their annual conference. It's a virtual one this year for folks interested in the paranormal, but also in related areas of the unexplained, including UFOs, cryptozoology, all of that stuff. There'll be presentations kind of running the gamut by folks who are serious researchers who have been looking into the phenomena, the experiences that people have, and so on. I don't know what the schedule is. I haven't really looked at it. I'm actually going to be traveling, unfortunately, visiting families. Well, that's fortunate, but unfortunately, I'll be missing the conference. But they also record everything, and it's available afterwards for a few weeks. So I'll probably be registering that way myself. So that's just scientificexploration.org. And that's a really good organization. They have an open access journal, meaning you can get the journal for free. They also have something called Edge Science, which is a newsletter kind of publication, also free. So I encourage you to go to the website and check out what's there, because it really has some good stuff. And then I thought also, until I get some questions here, I'm just going to keep on rattling on. I was telling my producer that last night we watched, I'd call it a good, bad movie. That's the way I want to put it. Worth watching. There's a movie now out called Zombie Wedding. If you like zombie movies at all, it's worth watching. It is produced in conjunction with the Weekly World News, that wonderful tabloid that has the greatest stories on earth, I think. In fact, there's a couple of Weekly World News reporters that are part of the movie. And it premiered at some theaters in a variety of places, I think on the 21st of yesterday. But it also became available on demand on Amazon Prime and Apple Plus and a bunch of other platforms, Vudu and those others, for $2.99. So we kind of had to watch it last night. It's like I said, it's a good, bad movie. I'll say that. And it may be the first thing the Weekly World News is doing. So I'm kind of looking forward to other stuff because I love going to their website. So, and if you're not familiar with the Weekly World News, just Google that and take a look and see what they have. Go to their website. Okay, thanks, Tina, for putting that there. Yeah, they do a lot of great stuff for the SSC out there. I have not seen the preview for Salem's Lot, the new version, but I've heard really good things about the trailer. And I'm trying to remember if Stephen King tweeted something about it, you know, something. I thought that was what he was talking about in one tweet about how he's looking forward to how they interpret it. So that'll be really interesting to see that. This will be the third version of Salem's Lot out there. In fact, I think it was last year, I finally got to see the last 10 minutes of the original one from, the 80s or 90s, whenever the hell it was. We had a power outage, as I recall. No, actually, it was cut into by some news report, the last 10 minutes. They never got to actually broadcast that. So I finally got to see it. I just don't remember when the original was out there. It was maybe into the 70s, in fact. It probably was the late 70s. Okay. I have one other thing I'm going to talk about here in a bit, but I just wanted to see if folks have any questions or topics they want to kind of pop out there. My producer and I were talking about a couple of my favorite TV movies from the 70s, which are available on YouTube now, I found. Also, apparently last night, they showed The Night Stalker on MeTV on Svengoolie. And so one of them's The Night Stalker, the other one's The Night Strangler, excuse me. But both of them Kolchak movies. So they're the movies that actually led to the TV series Kolchak the Night Stalker. And if you have not seen, because maybe you're not old enough to have seen the original Night Stalker movie, which is a vampire movie, and Night Strangler is a little different. Both of them, the scripts were written by Richard Matheson. The first one was based on the book, which had been unpublished at the time until the movie came out, by Jeff Rice. You can find the books now; they are in print. He wrote a book which eventually became called The Night Stalker after the movie came out. The script was written by Richard Matheson, one of the best horror TV and movie writers out there, but also one of the best fantasy writers too. And the other movie, The Night Strangler, Jeff Rice wrote the novelization, added a lot to it based on Richard Matheson's script. And so The Night Stalker was, at the time and through the 70s, was the highest rated TV movie, which is amazing. It was a vampire movie, so pretty cool. Okay, let's see. Peabody Essex Museum in Salem has a new exhibit, Conjuring the Spirit World. Oh, that's very cool. Magic and Mediums. That is very, very cool. I love Salem. Salem is one of my favorite places to visit. And actually, I was just reading an article on the Satanic Temple and Satanists, with quotes around there, the whole movement, which is really a free speech movement more than anything else. And that they have a site in Salem as well, where they have a museum, or like an art museum, and some other stuff there. Looked like a cool thing to go visit as well. It's not really, it's a very anti-religion thing. So it's a very, very cool thing. So Paul, you've seen both the Kolchak movie TV shows. Yeah, they filmed the TV show in Chicago. I don't know how much they filmed in Las Vegas, but they did film the first movie in Las Vegas, and the second movie was set in Seattle. And I know that they did some shooting in Seattle, but a whole part of that film takes place in the Seattle Underground, and that was all made up. I mean, there is a Seattle Underground because Seattle is built on the leftover from a previous city, and there are even underground tours, but not to the extent that you saw in the movie. Both are really good movies to watch, though, I think. And they're both on YouTube. So one, Night Stalker is 1971, Night Strangler 72. If you look for it, I would just do Night Stalker TV movie or Night Strangler TV movie and look for the dates, and they'll both be there. Of course, there are other films called The Night Stalker or Night Stalker as well out there. And Kolchak's big. There's a company called Moonstone Books that has been pumping out Kolchak novels, actually, for quite some time, and even comic books. And they're a lot of fun to read, including the one where he teams up with the Green Hornet, which was very cool as well. So anyway, back to some other stuff. Let's see. So we have a bunch of folks here. I can see Paul and Tina are pretty active here. Anyone have anything they'd like me to pop in? Otherwise, I'll talk about this other piece that kind of came up in the last couple of days. At all? So I guess I'll jump right into that. So someone sent me an email to the askprofparanormal@gmail.com email, which is the appropriate place to send an email to me if you want questions for this show. And he asked me to take a look at a specific video on a popular channel called Red Letter Media. It's the name of the channel, Red Letter Media. Apparently, they do investigate or look at things all over different topics. They had never done a paranormal topic before. They're doing this this particular episode It's one of two, and I didn't have a chance because I got the email yesterday. I haven't had a chance to really watch the whole hour, but I did kind of sample it throughout the hour today. Sent back an email to the person, and if you want to put that Graveyard Grog, if you want to put that link up in there, because I know you have that set up. Thank you. It's worth watching. I'm going to watch the whole thing because what they do is they're taking a look at how paranormal investigations are portrayed on TV and what ghost hunters tend to do in their investigations with the equipment. So they're looking at the equipment. They looked at video, a couple of video samples of supposed phenomena, the orb thing they talked about, and they're taking, and I don't want to say skeptical approach, except by using that term in the best sense of the word. And that is questioning whether these devices do what they say, what other things affect the devices, what really causes the orbs and some of the phenomena that people report on their security cameras and things like that. What I spot checked, they're right on for every single bit of it. When we in the field of, or related to the field of parapsychology, do investigations, we don't rely on equipment to detect phenomena. We rely on equipment sometimes that is the environmental sensing in general to see if anything's happening in the environment when someone has an experience. So if you're in any building, even if it has a report of, like a rumor or historically people said this place is haunted, if you don't have witnesses, preferably somebody with you, all you got is a story, a rumor. And just because you get some unusual stuff on your equipment doesn't mean that that necessarily connects to an experience or is related to the phenomena. You need somebody, a human detector, to actually give that context. So they didn't talk, at least the parts that I watched, they didn't talk about witnesses specifically, but they were taking the same approach that we take in that if you get something on any sort of sensing equipment or any technology, you have to eliminate normal explanations. Because if you don't, what you're trying to explain or understand or study, you have no idea if it's really paranormal or not. All you know is it's creating a weird thing on your device. So they're really taking the right approach in that. And we do know the orb phenomena is just photographic with almost the rarest exceptions. And there are potential exceptions there. Most of the security camera stuff, also video related, often related to the fact that many of them are using infrared, dust, and also other kinds of things that the infrared reflects off of. So when we do investigations, number one, if we're using technology, we're trying to correlate to people's experiences. And number two, we are trying to eliminate all the normal possibilities, even if they're unusual, so that we have something to actually study. Because otherwise, you just have a lot more questions. Of course, if you're in one of the ghost hunting groups and take the readings on your devices as being proof of a ghost being present, clearly you don't have questions. It's just that that's folklore created by TV. And there was a point at which I happened to hit on where they're talking about the TV shows, and one of the things that explains so much of what goes on the shows, and why we can't get a good backup explanation. Do they fake things? Do they edit things together and all sorts of things? And one of the guys says, it's the one truth about all these shows, the one feature, and I can't recall exactly how he phrased it, but it was they put up on the screen, ironclad NDA, which is absolutely true. The so-called talent on the shows cannot talk about any hanky-panky that went on behind on the editing, except in the loosest terms, because they're under a non-disclosure agreement, which has severe penalties, most likely, because most of those do, if they violate it. So this is the main truth of reality TV. And it's one of the reasons why I haven't done some of the shows that have asked me to do them, not the ghost hunting shows, but other shows, a few ghost hunting shows, is because I will not sign the ironclad NDA. I sign a limited NDA usually with these things. And actually, if you take the Ethics class and investigations, one of the things we talk about is working with media. That's kind of my last class of my contribution to that. So the ethics of doing that sort of thing in general. So yeah, take a watch of this. And actually, they're apparently going to be going to the Valeska axe murder house to do their investigation, their follow up on this first episode. I'm really curious to watch this one and see what happens with the other one. So, all right, questions, anybody? Kind of a not a very chatty group tonight, as it seems. So maybe I'll talk a little bit about a couple of other topics. So until I get a question, I'll just start right in. I've had a couple of people send me emails, and it's been very difficult. It's really interesting. It's coming from two different people, very similar questions. Let me stop for a second and talk about Sightings here for a minute. Sightings was a really good show. It was sort of a companion on Fox to the X-Files. It's kind of their real life stories versus the X-Files stuff. And I was very fortunate to be on the ground floor with Sightings. They started out with a 2-hour, which I'm pretty sure you can find on YouTube, 2-hour special on UFOs. So it was Sightings: UFOs. The second one was Sightings: the Ghost Report. And I was involved in that one, and the next one, Psychic Powers. Then they went to series. So before they shot the Ghost Report, they actually, the main producer director, Rob Kirk, contacted me and contacted Carrie Gaynor and asked us if we'd be involved in things. He was trying to get an understanding of investigations, get an understanding of the kinds of cases, trying to find out how they would get cases to use on the show, all of that stuff. And they had, as I recall, I think they had a case. No, actually, they might have had one case already, but they were looking for others. And Ryan, I'll get back to that after I describe this. I think that Rob was, and I've talked to Rob since then, he was instrumental in making that show initially a great show to start with, although it was screwed around with, and I'll get to that in a moment. So they were looking for ghost cases, and Carrie and I, in talking, came up with an idea. And that was, why not have Fox put out a press release asking for cases and giving a contact number, which would then funnel the cases to us, or the calls to myself and Carrie. And then we would make the determination as to which cases made sense, which ones could have been fake or phony or wacky or crazy, which ones made sense for television. And so they put out a press release. What's amazing to me is the press release, because of timing, it was like Christmas Day, and it only ran in the entertainment sections in papers, a few papers in, I believe it was Michigan and Texas. And yet over 200 calls, which Carrie and I whittled down to about 40 potentially good cases, and then we found some cases out of that to work off of. So it was really a good thing to do, and in fact, it appeared in the entertainment section, was really a good idea at the time. The specials are really good. The show itself, when they were originally, was going to be like In Search Of. It was going to be every episode was going to touch on a different topic. But what we heard from production people was that someone at the top of Fox, and one of the folks even said it might have been Rupert Murdoch himself, apparently said, and this is a typical TV executive thing, let's not do one topic per show. Let's mix it up a little bit, like a magazine show. So you might have a ghost story and a cryptid story and something else in there, because our audience doesn't have the attention span to watch a 30-minute show on the same topic, which is absolutely untrue. It really shows, and this is the kind of attitude the executives have in all the shows. It shows a lack of understanding of who the audience is, but more importantly, it's like they're pandering, they're downplaying the intelligence of the typical viewer who is interested in this stuff. which is ridiculous. Anyway, it was a great show until about the third or fourth year. It switched over to UPN. Some of the original production people got moved on to other things. And we found that there were some directors that were not taking things seriously. And in one case with Carrie's situation, he found that they had promised follow-up, that they'd even fly Carrie out to do follow-up after Carrie had been there once with the sightings team to actually do follow-up. And they never said a word to Carrie about it. Same thing happened. Similar thing happened to me. It wasn't a follow-up issue, but it was, I heard from clients that they were promising things that they absolutely had not talked to us about and couldn't promise. So we kind of backed off. Unfortunate. It's television. All right, Ryan, what is your experience with evil spirits? I often see spirits of deceased humans depicted as monsters. Yeah. Okay. I don't have any experience with evil spirits unless you want to count your typical bully as evil rather than something else. On occasion, we've had cases where the apparition, the spirit, was, having a good time screwing around with people or trying to bully them. I don't call that evil. I might say, pardon the expression, that they're an asshole, but that doesn't make them evil per se. And usually we were able to work around that and work that out. I don't take the tact or approach that there's necessarily any evil out there. That is something that comes from television and from religion, but television certainly picked up on it because it gets ratings. There are very few truly evil people in the world. And here's an interesting thing. It must have been about 15 years ago. One of my colleagues put out a question to an e-group that I'm in, looking at evidence for life after death, and actually canvassed the literature going back 100 years, looking for instances of apparitions, conscious or what you call intelligent apparitions or ghosts, still conscious, still interacting, not the repeated hauntings, not the residual stuff, where that entity was evil or was a ghost of a murderer or someone who was a criminal or someone who did horrible things to people. Now, some bullies do, not physically horrible things, and they certainly can be abusive in some ways. Even that's rare, but there were no examples of like serial killers or murderers other than a couple that he found, both of which were people who were executed, but turned out later on to be innocent of their crimes. So, not evil. I do always recommend a book called The Science of Evil by Simon Baron-Cohen. It's an exceptional book which takes a look at what we call evil and how that really is about a lack of empathy. And so think of a sociopath, a full-blown sociopath may actually do evil things because they have no empathy for other beings or living things, and kind of their emotional life is like minimal if existing at all. So they might get a thrill out of things, but even they don't show up as ghosts later on. Now, on the residual side, however, bad things happen as well as good things that end up as the haunting. That doesn't mean that there's evil there. There was an evil act or a violent act, and that did impress the environment. So that's the way we do that. But it's really all about TV and films. Horror is emotionally evocative. It grips us. We like to be scared. So that's one of the reasons why that's all showing up on everywhere and always has. Jesus, yeah. When you were a child, you loved sightings with all your heart. Yeah. I don't know if you were on the show when I was mentioning if you look up, you'll see the link to the Red Letter Media thing that you told me about. So thank you for doing that. Sightings was a great show. There are some episodes out there on YouTube. It's unfortunate that was never released on video. I would love to have a set of all the sighting shows. I did record, because of course it was VCR days at that point. I did record most of my episodes. In fact, you can find many of them. My segments, not all, but many of them are available on my other YouTube channel, which is simply youtube.com/Lloyd Auerbach. There's a lot of my media appearances there. Many of my sightings appearances are there. So not whole episodes of sightings, but pieces of that. Certainly the stuff I did. Yeah, thank you, Jesus. I honestly, I'm looking forward to really watching the whole thing at this point. So I will watch that, and I'll look forward to their next piece. It may be something I even use in one of my classes down the road. In the wintertime, I'll be co-teaching a class on a skeptical approach to parapsychology, which is really kind of questioning things that we consider evidence until we make sure it really is evidence. And that may be a good example for folks to watch as well. Okay, so back to the question I was going to talk about, the one I actually got a couple of emails about a month apart. I just got one recently, and both people were asking me, and it is two different people, about why some people in parapsychology, why they are real materialists and don't believe in life after death or the evidence for life after death, why they focus only on the brain, even though some of them start look at the ability to get information through extrasensory perception, what's called anomalous cognition or non-local consciousness, that not all of our consciousness is locked in the brain, or at least information. And in both cases, I'm ending up in a situation where they're asking me to comment as detailed as possible on someone else's perspective and belief, and I'm not in that headspace. So I've got to respond accordingly. And I've tried to do that, but I keep getting emails from one guy from a month ago about this. I do not approach this as strictly the brain. Certainly, we have a lot of really good evidence that supports that it's not just the consciousness is not just the brain, or if it is when you're alive, then it still can potentially stick around in some sort of coherent way after death. So it really comes to what's been called the hard problem of science, which is the question, what is consciousness? Is consciousness, obviously it has to have some physical properties to exist in the universe, but is it stuck in the brain or is it beyond? There's all sorts of philosophies around consciousness, ideas of consciousness. Nobody has somebody has the answer right now, but we don't know that it's the answer. And it may be also that we're not asking the right questions. One of the things about science that I think is important to always consider, that science is not necessarily a quest to find the answers unless you know the questions first. We have lots of things in front of us, and we have to figure out what the right question is and whether we have the capacity to answer that question given what we know right now. So, for example, there's still a lot we're learning about the brain from a physical standpoint, a neurological standpoint, a biophysics standpoint. And we may not have the knowledge to answer the what is consciousness question yet. So it's a situation where science has to and does evolve. Real science gains and incorporates new information that comes in. It's not dogma, and it's really important to do that. Okay, so here we go. Let's see. Night souls, I guess we humans are drops of consciousness from a whole, like genetic fields of energy still connected to the source. That is one absolute perspective. In fact, one idea here that has been put out there is that our bodies, our brains, are basically receivers and transmitters of consciousness, that consciousness is actually out here, whether it's in a morphogenic or morphogenetic field or the forest or something else, that we have from birth, we have a spike of consciousness that comes in. It activates certain things in the brain. The brain is an interface and allows gathering of information, which then becomes part of that consciousness as a whole or individually in some respects. So think of it as the brain is your laptop. You have memory storage, but it all can get uploaded to the cloud. And maybe the original program is up here in the cloud. It's working through. It's a web-based program in that sense. I think we've got starting to get to some metaphors we can actually use at this point. It's hard to know because we don't have the science at this point to know specifically. Rupert Sheldrake came up with the idea of morphogenic fields or morphogenetic fields, depending how it's like the field of all living things, because everything's entangled. We're all made of star stuff, and at some level of reality going back in time, we are all connected at the quantum level and possibly at the greater level as well. But that also describes George Lucas's force. It describes a lot of other different interpretations of what connects us all. The idea that consciousness or some form of what we can call consciousness, not human consciousness, is at the base level of the universe itself. So night souls, like small resonant phantoms locked inside consciousness, rejects a whole. Yeah, that can be one way of looking at it. There are plenty of different ways, and the only way you really run into a lot of these concepts is in science fiction or philosophy, one or the other. And so you can kind of approach it. Personally, I think the sci-fi approach, comic book approach, is a lot more fun. But there are books, talking about consciousness from different philosophical viewpoints that are important. In fact, one of the things that I talk about in the class I was just asked about, Paul has asked, when will you teach the next class in survival at the Rhine? That's going to be in the spring. And I definitely talk about this question of consciousness and different approaches to it. I'll also touch on it in my class coming up in October on sci in the media. So basically sci and television, films, literature, comic books, radio, old-time radio shows, all of that. Think of it as pop culture and sci and consciousness. And one of the very first lecture, we talk quite a bit about consciousness and portrayals of that, because there's all sorts of fun stuff out there about whether consciousness can be uploaded to a computer. Is that still the person's soul? There's all that question about soul and spirit and everything like that. Is it just a copy? That kind of thing. So it's an interesting question, but for me, for someone to put themselves in the headspace of a pure materialist when you absolutely don't agree with that, it's tough. It's tough for me to do that. I know a bit about it, and I've had discussions with one of our pure materialists in our field. And, he accepts my position. I accept his position. The one type of phenomena that many of the materialists have a serious problem with, even in the field of parapsychology, because it's a big question mark for them, is the idea of children who remember previous lives. Because an alternate explanation for all the ghostly stuff is that it's all coming from living people. It's sometimes called super ESP or super psi. Depending on the phenomena, can also be difficult to model, but that I can certainly explain. But when it comes to the idea of children remembering previous lives, the idea of this super ESP or super psi of this child, it just doesn't fit. It doesn't fit anything. There's so many reasons why it doesn't fit. And so even the true materialists are scratching their head about that. So interesting stuff for that. And, this whole question of what it is, it's not just, do we survive the death of the body? The question for us, a lot of it is, what is it that survives the death of the body? And we say consciousness, but then what is consciousness? So we have to address questions. And at this point, being the hard question in science, there are folks now looking at the question of what is consciousness from pretty much a lot of different fields of, maybe not every field of science, but many fields of science. Although I don't think that psychology is really looking at it too much, which is really ironic in so many ways. We have neurology, folks in neuroscience and physics and biophysics, biology in general. There are people in zoology looking potentially at, the idea of animal consciousness. Certainly in parapsychology, we've been looking at the question of consciousness since we started quite a bit. There are folks in sociology looking at beliefs in that. There are belief issues around what is consciousness. Of course, philosophy has been involved in this too. I would say probably not so much chemistry or geology. but you never know. Okay. Let's see if we have any more questions for folks or another topic you can throw out at me for this week. And while I'm waiting, I will mention that, yes, during that pop culture class, a lot of it is talking about movies. I mean, literally talking about some really great examples of different psychic phenomena, paranormal things in scripted movies. I don't touch the documentary stuff, and I don't touch reality TV till the last week. I do definitely talk about that because that's definitely pop culture. But I love talking about some of the great old movies and even more recent films with psychics and mediums and ghosts and reincarnation. Yes, and near-death experiences, Paul. Out-of-body experiences, all of that. That all fits in. Dream telepathy, psychic dreams, all of that kind of falls into the realm. There's some great films out there over the years. There are, honestly, there aren't a lot of good horror films that come close or really deal with the phenomena in a way that the dramas and comedies do, and even science fiction films do. Some of the sci-fi films are kind of sci-fi horror when it comes to body snatching or cloning or consciousness being reborn and things like even some of the psychic stuff. One example of a film that's both science fiction and touches on horror is the movie Scanners that David Cronenberg directed so many years ago. It's the only time that I've ever seen a psychic's head explode, other than on the front page of the Weekly World News. So, and then comic books. While I'm more of a DC guy than a Marvel guy, comic books have a long history of psychic powers, of ghostly things, of the paranormal as part of it. Whether you're a mutant in the Marvel universe, or you're a meta human in the DC universe, or one of the other independents that's been out there over the years. Comic book fans tend to know more of the lingo in parapsychology, which is really, frankly, very, very interesting. So do science fiction people. And there's some great science fiction books out there that deal with all this phenomena. In fact, I'll just mention that I mentioned Richard Matheson earlier in tonight's show, having written the script for the adaptation of the Night Stalker novel by Jeff Rice for the original Kolchak the Night Stalker movie. But then he wrote an original script of The Night Strangler. He also wrote a percentage of the Twilight Zone episodes, some of which were very, very popular. He wrote a book called Hell House, which became a movie that he also wrote the script of, called The Legend of Hell House, which I think is a great, great movie. The book is better. He wrote also some things that were not so much horror. He wrote a book called Stir of Echoes, which has a lot of ghostly stuff in it. It became a movie which was tinged with a little bit of horror, really more suspense than horror. Stir of Echoes came out, I think, 1 or 2 weeks after The Sixth Sense with Bruce Willis, which caused, unfortunately, it to be lost. It's a movie that I highly recommend with Kevin Bacon as the star. The book's better, though. Matheson wrote a book called What Dreams May Come, which was a decent movie with Robin Williams and Cuba Gooding Jr. And he also wrote a book that became known as Somewhere in Time, a more time travel romance with Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour. He wrote a lot of stuff, and he also was one of the most knowledgeable people in fiction writing about psychic phenomena in general. According to my buddy Barry Taff, who knew Matheson very well and had been to his house and saw possibly the most incredible parapsychology library he'd ever seen. So Matheson put real stuff in his books. There are other psychic-related books that he wrote also, so I highly recommend his stuff. All right, do you have any comments on Dean Radin's book, Real Magic? Yeah, I think, Dean's a good writer. I enjoyed the book, Real Magic. The use of the term magic, in some respects, what he's trying to do in that book is give it new life in relation to psychic functioning. Because when you look at the idea of magic beliefs in through anthropology, and it's another course that I teach in Parapsych and for the Rhine Research Center. When you look at beliefs in magical practices, there is an awful lot in the rituals and beliefs that support psychic functioning, that are psi-conducive. They bring out psychic things in the rituals and the beliefs and the practices that are there. So flipping that, where that idea of that belief in magic is akin to a belief in psi, even though sometimes it gets a little bit, it's been kind of co-opted in some ways by the New Age movement. I think it's a really good thing. Dean also did spend time speaking to Alen New, who is one of my buddies, psychic entertainer buddies, one of the best performers out there I know. And Alen has had some real psychic experiences as well. So I think it's a really good book, and it's a fun read in some respects. Let's see. It may be that the true essence of the question, what is consciousness, lies in its connection to the afterlife. I had a discussion years ago with Gary Schwartz, who really was somewhat at the request of HBO. He kickstarted the whole concept of research with spirit mediums again. Some had been done over in the latter part of the 20th century, but pretty rare. And HBO came to him at the University of Virginia. They have a consciousness studies lab, and came to him and asked him if he would be willing to be the site for them to do some research with some spirit mediums. Like, John Edward was one, Suzanne Northrup was another, George Anderson was one. So some well-known mediums, and to create as much of a scientific experiment as they could. And there were some issues with the initial experiments that were on HBO, but really interesting stuff that came through. And that led to Gary getting more interested in this. It also led to Julia Beischel, who currently founded and runs the Windbridge Research Center, does some of the best scientific research on mediums out there, and really well controlled. But what happened was, in my conversation with Gary, the problem with using mediumship as evidence for life after death, for survival, is you have an intermediary. It's not direct. So we're relying on, the reason which they're called mediums, by the way, is because they're intermediaries between the living and the dead. That puts them in the middle, means they're mediums. All right. So Gary was wondering if because he had seen the stuff on ghost hunting shows and seen the environmental equipment we use, whether or not setting up that equipment when a medium's doing their thing would make any sense. And I think it actually would. In a stationary lab where you could actually have the medium come in and do readings, and also have the medium come in and do some other discussions with living people, because you need to compare, you have to have a control in some respects. And it would be interesting to see if there's correlations to, if there's anything happening when they say that a spirit's present and they're speaking with the spirit, or the spirit's allowed to jump in their body, and what happens? Is there a connection? Is there a correlation there? And I pointed out that it's still involving a human, which could be a problem, a living human. So what we really need is a volunteer ghost. We need an apparition who's willing to volunteer to go into a controlled environment in a lab. A medium would be outside the lab looking in, saying, yes, there's somebody here. And then we're still relying on somebody saying, there's somebody here. And then without letting that medium know what's going on with the equipment, have to see what's going on. In other words, we have to try to do direct, somehow, assessment of the physical environment when there is a spirit present, and do a correlation and see what's happening there. The biggest problem with ghost hunting tech is that none of the devices can be intentionally built to detect ghosts, because we don't know what we're trying to detect. Same with hauntings. We do know from all the research that's been done in and out of the lab that psi itself is not electromagnetic. Ghosts or apparitions are not electromagnetic, but that doesn't mean they can't affect the electromagnetic environment. Kind of like a boat on a still lake creating a wake. So we would be detecting the wake, not the boat. And we have to infer or deduce, depending on how you want to look at it, that there is a spirit present in that sense. So we need those kind of cooperative ghosts, and we don't really have them specifically. So, and then we have to, again, how would we be sure that the ghost is really present? We have to look for those patterns. So I think you're right that pure consciousness without a body is more important to detect or connect with than the issue of consciousness in the body. To paraphrase the great fiction writer Ambrose Bierce, who wrote a great fun book called The Devil's Dictionary, which you can find in print and also for free. The problem with the mind is, and studying the mind and assessing what the mind is that it has nothing to study, but study the mind with except itself. So this is a case where humans are studying their own consciousness while having consciousness, and that's a problem scientifically. Can't get outside that level and that fact, which is too bad. Anyway, good questions, good discussion here. And then of course we run more recent times. There are those people who subscribe to the simulation hypothesis or theory or model of the world, that we're all simulations in someone's computer program. For so many reasons, I don't buy that. But there are a few physicists who believe that that's the case. I don't know why they do, but maybe they saw The Matrix one too many times. I don't really know. What was really funny is one of my students, in talking about this at the Rhine Center, we had one of our classes, I think it was a survival class this past time I offered it, said, well, there are glitches in that simulation, and those glitches we call psychic phenomena or psychic experiences. And I turned around and I said, how do you know, if we really live in a simulation, that those are not features instead of glitches? They're built into the program. Again, I don't buy the simulation thing. Let's see. Cartesian theory, theater theory, yeah. Thank you, Paul. There have been some recent podcasts I've been doing here and there. I'm going to have to do a collection of all of them and post them someplace, because there have been so many. I do them, it seems like. I have another one that I'm going to be doing on October 10th. That'll be live when I have the link. It's a new show, or it's a guy resurrecting an old show. So I don't really have a link for it at all at this point. But once we get all that, I can put it up there. And there are other people who have been asking me too. I tend to do a few every month. And of course, October's coming up, so my guess is I'll be asked for a few more at some point. Okay. We are at about the 10-minute countdown point. Anybody have any other questions, comments, suggestions, any of that at this point? And if not, I will just remind everybody that the second edition of my book, A Paranormal Casebook, is available. Published that early this year. I will be next year working on a second volume. When I was rewriting or kind of redoing the Paranormal Casebook, somebody had asked me if I was going to be adding additional cases. And I did update some stuff in the book here and there, but and hi, Liz. But I decided, as I was looking at, well, what cases would I add, that I had more than enough good cases, because I'm only putting good cases in, not ones that are kind of like the same as everything else. I want more unique cases to go in there. I have enough for another volume, so I will be writing those up over the next 6 months or so, and getting that out there probably towards the end of, like summer or fall of 2025. And yes, audiobook version. I'm just trying to figure out the best way to do that. If I do it myself, there are a number of things I'm going to have to do, and it will take me quite a long time, just simply because I'm busy. takes a while. But I'll see if I can at least do a couple of the stories in there and get them out there, kind of as shorts or something like that. We'll do something with that. So you're not the first person to ask for an audiobook version, Tina. And I'd love to do it. I'd love to not have to have someone else do it. I hate to think that I might be going towards an AI to do it for me, because there are some better and better voices, but doing it myself also involves significant editing, unless I'm lucky in reading things through. And while I may have over time the ability to do all the reading, I may not have the time to do the editing for that. So I'm going to have to see if I can bring someone in that project as well. I would prefer it's my voice, but there is AI out there that can copy people's voices, as scary as that happens to be. So we'll see. It'll most likely be me, but again, it's going to be a while for that. All right. We're dropping down here. Anybody else have anything at all? So just going back to the audiobook thing, what I may do is I might do recording a reading of some of the stories in the book and putting them out there for free, and then having them edited into an actual book, audiobook. You know of any scientific research evidence that Reiki works? I know that that there have been some clinical studies with Reiki. I am not familiar enough with Reiki healing to really even point to those or guess those. But I know that a couple of people I know who do Reiki, who have been involved in teaching Reiki, have talked about some evidence that Reiki works. But the question always is, with anything, how much of that is placebo, which is still when it creates a physical effect in the body, our minds affect our bodies. And to my perspective, that is still psychokinesis. Reiki, if it's energy or not, I mean, there's definitely energy being given off by the human body. There's no question about that. That's detectable. I don't know that you can call that energy Reiki energy specifically, whether there's something different. But we can be affected by certain things. And it may not be that Reiki does anything from the outside other than triggering something in us. So the placebo effect, which is a form of mind-body connection, which can cause physical changes in the body. I mean, that's why they often test pharmaceuticals, new drugs, against the placebo effect. It's because it's a real effect, which has not enough study on it, and has real function. It really works. Just like the nocebo effect, the negative thing, can also work on changes in the body. So even if Reiki is just that, and I think it's more than that, actually, it's energy healing, supposedly. Well, it may be that the Reiki practitioner's energy, their energy that they're giving off, we have a low-level electromagnetic field. We give off infrared or heat energy. There may be another form of energy that we're giving off. We give off biophotons, very, very low level, so that's probably not anything related. However, there is research going on energy healing, in the sense that the body gives off biophotons, and usually about 1 to 5 per second, which is not very much. John Kruth at the Rhine Research Center has been doing work on with biophoton energy, and finding that some healers he's brought in and some martial artists have been able to generate huge amounts of biophotons. In one point, I think there was one healer, it was either a healer or martial artist, who got up to 1 million biophotons per second. So if Reiki is some form of increased electromagnetic field, increased biophotons, increased something that interacts with the same thing in the person who's the recipient, the patient, there may be an energetic exchange that actually does something. So anyway, that's a really good question. I think that would be really interesting to kind of do further research about. Let's see. More we learn, more questions we raise. That is science, actually. I like to say that science is a game of Jeopardy, where we have the answers in front of us, but we have to find the right question that fits the answers, fits the evidence. A fellow attendee was talking about his grandmother while we were at dinner. When we were trying to remember what hair perms smelled like, the three of us smelled a perm wafting by. Yeah, people never think about smell as memory, that you can perceive a smell. And what's interesting is there is a phenomenon called red integration, where a smell will trigger a memory. So what that means is you might smell a particular apple pie with cinnamon when you, I don't know, walk past a bakery, and that triggers an actual visual or other memory in you of something that had nothing to do with apple pie as a child, but was an association. And it works the other way around. In fact, there's a whole section of apparition experiences, which are called olfactory apparitions, where people didn't see the apparition, they didn't hear the apparition, they smelled a specific smell associated with that person, which then may have moved around. In fact, my very first ghostly experience, if you want to call it that, was an olfactory apparition with two other guys, in fact. Two other magicians, as it happens. So the smell thing is pretty interesting. All right. Yeah, and let's see here. Remember reading about books by Deepak Chopra about Ayurvedic medicine? Yeah. There's all sorts of different types of alternative medicine, different approaches. Acupuncture is accepted as an alternative treatment by some insurance companies and even gets referrals. Chiropractic, which is often considered pseudoscience, and there's a lot of bad chiropractors out there. In some states, you can't practice chiropractic. In California, you can, and actually some of the insurance will cover chiropractic. So, the one place not to learn about alternative medicine is Wikipedia, because they are completely biased against that. And so is the AMA, by the way. That's the problem. Energy and intent in Reiki. Intention is really important. And, there's another thing about healing that's really important that we certainly have seen in parapsychological healing research. And it actually reflects on the idea that people can curse you or psychically attack you. And that is, you have to be willing to accept the healing. Consciously or unconsciously. You have to want to get better. Interestingly enough, good MDs, good medical doctors will know that the patient has to have an I want to get better attitude to actually speed up recovery or even to recover at all. It's that mind-body thing. If we flip it to the psychic attack idea, if you can't get healed unless you want to be healed, you can't be attacked psychically unless you're a victim, if that's your psychology. If you're in that victim mode, you might be accepting all sorts of bad stuff. All right. We are at 6:30 my time. We're at the final point here. Just a reminder to everybody about a couple of things. The next show I'll be doing is going to be October 6th. That's in 2 weeks. After that, I'm skipping 3 weeks to October 27th, and then I'll be back on a 2-week schedule. Also, please go to Rhine EDU, so RHINE edu.org. Again, the link is in the description of the channel. That's the Rhine Education Center, to see what new classes are being offered starting the week of October 7th, so right after my next show. And I hope to see some of you in one of those classes. I'm looking forward to teaching my pop culture class, especially because it's a lot of fun for me. And if you're looking for movies and TV shows and other things to read, well, that's a really good class to take. All right, thanks, everybody. I hope you have a good couple of weeks, and we'll see you in October.